because we treat the presidency like an end-all be-all of solutions. And frankly, that's the least amount of power that you're ever going to get through voting. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this episode of the Gap Fillers podcast. My name is Michael Bradford. We look to cover national and Florida politics and cultural events. So on that note, let's get started here. So this past month, the Iowa State Senate lost their supermajority from the Republicans, so the Republicans no longer have their supermajority. And Obama took to X and was touting why Democrats are going to lead the charge into this next election year. Now, he has a point. Republicans and people the party that is usually in power has this difficulty of motivating their base because there's no longer anybody to blame but themselves. So this becomes a problem, even though the solutions aren't always clear. Okay, so how does this appeal to Florida? Right, this is a Florida podcast. You know why am I bringing this up? Well, this past week, in September, last Tuesday rather, the Republicans and Democrats had a state representative election here in Orange County. Now, did anybody know? I didn't. I barely knew. I had to go in and look at the year's events or the year's elections to figure out when's the election's going to happen. We had only 24% turnout for the 60 municipalities around the state this past March. And we wonder why our cities look like liberal monstrosities that they are. Because, frankly, we don't pay attention. We think that the cities are already lost, or we say, oh, Trump is in power. We don't have to pay attention to local politics. That's just blatantly wrong. Okay? Because we are a representative republic, we must always be aware that responsibility is not passed on to a king. It's not passed on to an oligarchy. It is passed on to each individual voter. And because we're a universal suffrage, everybody over 18 should pay attention. Because if not, we're responsible. Okay? So 8%. That was the voter turnout for this past election. And now it was in West Orange, which tends to be more liberal, but at it was actually more like 12%. But at that, literally anybody could have won. Anybody that was paying attention, if you could motivate your base, a libertarian could have won that election. Because it is 10% of the 200,000 people that were eligible to vote in that voted. So it ended up being like 24,000 people voted overall in the entirety of West Orange. So that includes Apopka, that includes Pine Hills, that includes Ocoee. All of those places, only 20,000 people voted. And so we say we value our democracy or our republic, but do we truly? Are we always paying attention to and trying to keep our representatives in line? No, frankly not. It comes around every 4 years for presidency because we treat the presidency like an end-all be-all of solutions. And frankly, that's the least amount of power that you're ever going to get through voting. If you want to influence your community, if you want to influence your state, if you want to save what is left of our culture and bring us back to what we view as a moral Christian nation, then we must focus on the small things. We must focus on the boards of education. We must focus on our county commissioners. We must focus on our HOAs, for goodness sake, because each little individual piece creates more and more tyranny. And the less you pay attention, or the less you default, or the more you default to somebody else, or rely on somebody else to tell you, that becomes you're not relieved of that responsibility. You are still held accountable because you are a voter. You are the government, so to speak, right? And that's the difference between monarchies, and that's the difference between democracies or any other form of dictatorship or government. Okay, so that's what we need to pay attention to. Okay, so how can you pay attention? Well, first of all, you can go to your local supervisor of elections. You can find a list of elections for that year. You don't have to, maybe you don't want to pay attention for the whole year. Fine, but you can at least once a year when you do your taxes or something, go through and see what elections are going to come up, and if you are, or if they're in your district. If not, if you know somebody in the district, call them, text them, or post on Facebook or Twitter or something. That's the very least you could do, because if you default your voting ability, your responsibility on somebody else, you will be ruled by somebody else. What you want your government to look like will never come to fruition if you do not pay attention. And that goes for every single group out there. If you're a pro-gun group, or if you're a pro-gun voter, if you're relying on the NRA, or if you're relying on the ATF to grant you more rights, that's not going to happen. First of all, that's where the city comes in. Like New York City, they can practically ban every weapon that they want, because they can get around these really minute laws. That's where those regulations come into effect. That's where your state comes into effect. That's why you have to pay attention to those small, especially in the off years. If you want your vote to count most, that's where it is. Thank you for joining me for this video, and I look forward to seeing you again.